In this video, we are going to talk about applications of redox reaction. Specifically, we are going to be discussing batteries and fuel cell. The batteries are separated into a brief overview of primary cell versus secondary cell, as well as some discussion regarding to battery life. For the fuel cell, we are going to primarily look at hydrogen fuel cell, and we're also going to discuss some of the issues related to hydrogen production and storage, as well as comparing fuel cell with the conventional combustion reaction we have covered in the first and second videos relating to VCE chemistry. We will also finish up with an actual exam question. So first, let's look at batteries. So battery is a commercial galvanic cell and is separated into two parts. Primary cell refers to the batteries that can't be recharged, and secondary cell refers to rechargeable batteries. Such as the lithium ion cells in electric cars, as well as lead acid batteries. So that's the 12-volt battery in your electric cars as well as in internal combustion cars. Because electric vehicles are getting more and more popular nowadays, this topic regarding redox reaction and batteries are becoming more and more important in the VCE chemistry exam. And there are many different types of batteries, and there are some very complicated reactions as well. It is not possible for you to know and understand every type of batteries available in the economy. And in the VCE exam, you are expected to solve the problem when they are presented with an unknown battery. So they will also come up with lots of different examples of batteries. And you are expected to use the chemical knowledge you have learned and applying those knowledge to answer those questions you haven't seen before. And if you have a solid understanding of redox reaction, you should be able to solve all the questions presented to you. And it's not necessary for you to remember all the different types of batteries currently in the market. So let's look at the secondary cells in detail. The primary cell is very easy. Once all the reactants have been converted into products, the battery died. So there's no further chemical reactions. So you move on to a new battery. But for secondary cells, it is more interesting because you can recharge it. So what do I mean by recharging the battery? This is actually reversing the previous reaction. So during discharge cycle, so when you are using the battery, some of your reactants are converted into products. And this is spontaneous redox reaction. And it's exothermic. It releases energy. And that's the reason you can power up your electric devices and even drive electric cars. But when you are recharging the battery, you want to reverse this reaction. And what is the reverse of a spontaneous redox reaction? It is basically electrolysis and we know it is endothermic. You need to put in electrical energy to force the reaction to be reversed. So the product of your galvanic cell or of your discharge reaction will be reformed into reactants again. And then you can continue on with this cycle of recharge and discharge. And this is what's actually happening in your lithium-ion batteries, in your mobile phone, in your laptop, and in electric cars. And this is done, this process, I think you should be very familiar with it. You connect the battery to a charger. And the very important thing you need to remember is that the voltage of the charger should be greater than the voltage of the cell. What do I mean by that? If your battery can generate 2 volts in discharge, so it can produce 2 volts of energy when it is undergoing this galvanic cell reaction. Then when recharging, the voltage needs to be greater than 2 volts. So why is this the case? Because you are forcing the reaction, forcing the reverse reaction to occur. And the reverse reaction is not spontaneous. And hence you need to put in more than the potential voltage of the battery itself to convert the products into reactants again. And how do you connect your battery with the charger? It's very similar as what we have learned in an electrolytic cell. So the positive terminal of the charger is connected to the positive electrode, and the negative terminal of the charger is connected to the negative electrode. So in summary, during discharge, your battery is galvanic cell. During recharge, it is electrolytic cell. So that's why it's called a secondary cell. It can act in both ways. Can be a galvanic cell as well as electrolytic cell. So discharge, galvanic, and this implies that we have oxidation at anode, reduction at cathode. And from our knowledge of galvanic cell, oxidation at anode means it is negative because you are rejecting the electrons. And also, opposite attracts. So when you are receiving the electron during this reduction reaction, the terminal should be positive to attract this electron. During recharge, it is electrolytic cell. And oxidation, remember the definition stays the same. It's still anode. Reduction is still cathode. But in this case, the polarity reversed. We are withdrawing the electron forcefully from the site of oxidation. So that's why we need positive to draw this electron. We are dumping electron at cathode, so the cathode have lots of electrons, so it's negative. And this is kind of confusing, I think. So maybe I just use this to illustrate. So suppose during discharge cycle, this is the anode, and this is the cathode. And anode is undergoing oxidation, so it is negative. Cathode is undergoing reduction, so it is positive. And the electron moves from anode to cathode. But during this electrolytic cell, we are reversing the order. So the old cathode becomes anode, and the old anode becomes cathode. So this is for the electrolytic, it becomes. So now cathode is actually negative, anode is positive. And the electron flow from anode to cathode. And if you think about this, this should make sense. Because when you are trying to reverse the reaction, what you are essentially doing is you want to move the electron in the opposite order. So in this way, the reaction that were previously done, like oxidation, will be forcefully converted into the reduction reaction again, and the reduction reaction would be converted to oxidation reaction. That's how you reform the reactants. And because of that, the original anode would become cathode. So originally you are losing electrons. To convert back into original state, you should be gaining electrons. And by definition, gain of electron is a cathode. Similarly, when you are gaining electrons during the discharge cycle, you should be losing electrons during the recharge cycle. So that's why cathode becomes anode. Although we are switching anode and cathode, but the polarity of both sides is negative. It's always negative, and on the right-hand side is always positive. What we are switching is the role of cathode and anode. So the old anode becomes cathode, the old cathode becomes anode. But the idea is, I want to emphasize this again, is we are trying to reverse everything we have done. So that's why we are swapping things around. So this is a brief introduction of the secondary cell. So now let's look at something very interesting called battery life. So the term battery life refers to the number of discharge and charge cycle before a battery becomes unusable. So we know that batteries have limited life. So why is this the case? Because during this recharge and discharge cycle, we have some unwanted physical and chemical changes. And the performance of batteries deteriorates after each charge and discharge cycle. Modern batteries can have lifetime of between 500 and 1200 cycles. And some batteries can even go up to 2000 cycles. And when you have done lots of recharge and discharge cycles, the capacity, which is defined as the amount of charge available, may drop to 80% of the original designed capacity. And this would decrease how long the battery can last between charges. So as you use your mobile phones or laptops, you would notice a decrease in battery life over time. And these are caused by several factors. So the first factor is loss of active materials. And by active materials, we know that it is the reactants and products of the cell reaction. Both reactants and products are important because what we are trying to do is to convert from reactants to products to release energy, and to convert products to reactant during this recharge cycle. So the active materials may detach from electrodes on each cycle. So when the active material detach from electrodes, it cannot be used in oxidation or reduction anymore, because the passage of electrons requires the products or the reactants to stick to electrodes, and in this way the exchange of electrons can occur. But if they fall off from the electrodes, then we cannot either make them lose or gain electrons, and so we are losing those active materials, thus decrease the amount of charge the battery can hold, since some of the materials are no longer participating in this chemical reaction. So this is one possibility. Another possibility is it can be converted into inactive forms via side reactions. So the active materials can actually be converted into something inert by these unwanted side reaction or secondary reactions. So the second possibility is you convert during this discharge and recharge cycle. You convert small crystals of active material into large crystals. And this essentially decreases the surface area. And when surface area decreases, it's harder for current to flow, and thus decreases the battery capacity. Because what we mean, another possibility is the formation of unwanted chemicals. So it may be the case that the active material are actually converted into some other chemicals that impede the operation of cells. The fourth one is impurities in cell materials. So this can include the electrolyte, the electrodes, and the casing of the battery. And those can react spontaneously if we are not careful enough with active materials. And this can convert active materials into unwanted chemical materials, or making the active materials inert. Also, the electrolyte can leak out. And if you have old batteries in your remote control and then you forgot to take them out over a long period of time, it's very possible that the electrolyte would leak out. And in this case, the battery would not function because you cannot complete the circuit anymore. Also, you may have corrosion. For the lead acid batteries, the electrolyte is very concentrated sulfuric acid. And over a long period of time, maybe 20-30 years, the sulfuric acid may eventually corrode a lot of internal components, and thus causing failures within the battery. So that's the 6 possible factors that can decrease the performance of batteries. You should be familiar with those factors because it is heavily assessed in the chemistry exam. So we talk about factors of deterioration. Now let's talk about what affects the rate of deterioration. This really depends on the temperature. So the higher the temperature, the faster the rate of deterioration. So what's the reason of that? As the temperature increases, we know that the rate of reaction increases, but in particular, the rate of side reactions will increase. And hence, this reduces battery life. And that's why it is important to cool down your batteries during operation. One real-life example is the hybrid models of Toyota cars. So in the earlier generations of Toyota hybrids, they do not have a filter for the cooling fan. So the cooling fan would sometimes be blocked by things like dog hairs and stuff like that. And once the cooling fan has been blocked, the hybrid battery cannot be cooled down anymore. And that's the usual cause of battery failures. If you clean that cooling fan often, those hybrid batteries can easily last 20 years and hundreds of thousands of kilometers. But once you block that cooling fan, the battery would fail very, very, very quickly. So heat is a particularly important determination of the rate of deterioration of your battery. Because as the rate of side reaction occurs, it becomes faster, you are decreasing the amount of active materials in your battery. So what about during very cold temperatures? During cold temperatures, we know that the rate of reaction will fall. You can find more about rate of reaction in one of my previous videos, also in the chemistry playlist. And when the rate of reaction decreases, you can deliver less charge. Hence, the capacity decreases. So the performance of the battery decreases. So that's why electric cars are unsuitable in cold climates. Because in cold climates, the performance of the battery would be very, very poor. But precisely due to its lower rate of reaction, the battery life can be preserved. So you get this trade-off going on. High temperatures is good at delivering higher battery performance, but simultaneously reduces battery life. Cold climates increases battery life and decreases performance. And one thing to note is that the side reactions and deterioration occurs even if the battery is not in use. And the life of the battery, if you want to extend the life of batteries that are not in use, you should store them in cold climates, such as in a fridge, because it slows down the side reactions. And you don't really care about the performance of battery since you are not using it. So this is a brief introduction about batteries. Now let's talk about fuel cells. So fuel cell is an electrochemical device that only do one thing. It converts chemical energy into electricity and heat. So it uses a continuous supply of fuel. And it does this without combustion. So what I call fuel cell is that it's doing combustion without combustion. So what do I mean by this? So the fuel used in fuel cell are commonly hydrogen gas or hydrocarbon fuels. And the so-called combustion or the conversion from chemical energy to electrical energy of fuel cell ultimately has the same underlying chemical principle as burning of fuel. So we know when you are burning fuel, you are doing a redox reaction. And in a fuel cell, you are also doing a redox reaction. So the underlying chemistry between burning a fuel and then using fuel cell to convert fuel into electric energy is exactly the same. But what is different is that burning a fuel is inefficient because you are losing a lot of heat energy of this intermediary step. But using fuel cell exploits this characteristic of redox reaction, which involves the transfer of electrons. And it uses this transfer of electron by separating it into two parts, anode and cathode, to generate electrical energy. So it is a smarter way to convert energy. But you should remember that the underlying principle should be the same. So that's why when you are doing a fuel cell with hydrocarbon fuel, the product, as you would expect, is just CO2 plus H2O, so carbon dioxide and water. And in this case, you do not get incomplete combustion, you always get complete oxidation in most cases. And so it is more efficient. So how efficient is fuel cell? So fuel cell is actually about 60% efficient. And this is actually very, very high. Because for your engine, 20% efficiency is considered as very good. So 60% is almost 3 times as efficient as doing combustion. And the oxidizing agent, so something that is reduced in a fuel cell, is always oxygen gas, because you are essentially doing combustion. And when you are doing combustion, you know that oxygen gas is always one of the reactant. And the next point is very important. The electrodes. And this is actually one of the study design dot point listed in the VCE Chemistry study design. So you need to know this very, very well. The electrodes are porous. So porous means it contains small holes. And the small holes means you have more surface area. More surface area means you have a higher rate of reaction. And it needs to conduct electricity because it is the electrode. And the electrodes are lined with a catalyst. So everything I have mentioned in the rate of reaction video comes back to this fuel cell. A catalyst could be nickel or platinum. So why don't we use platinum? Because it is too expensive. And nickel is much cheaper, so we use nickel instead. So we use a catalyst to further increase the rate of reaction by providing an alternative pathway for the reaction to occur with lower activation energy. So all of this design is helped to increase the rate of reaction and thus increase the efficiency of your fuel cell. And as I have mentioned before, the overall reaction for a fuel cell is just the combustion reaction. Which is fuel, if you are doing hydrocarbon plus oxygen goes to H2O plus CO2. So this is always what the overall reaction looks like if you have hydrocarbon fuel. And the simplest fuel cell is the hydrogen fuel cell. As the name suggests, it uses hydrogen as the reactant. So let's look at what is the overall equation. Remember, it is just the combustion reaction. But hydrogen is not a hydrocarbon fuel. It does not contain carbon. So let's look at its overall chemical equation. So it's hydrogen gas plus oxygen. Remember, as we have mentioned before, oxygen is always the oxidizing agent of fuel cell. And because you are not having hydrocarbon, the only product should be H2O. And now it's just a matter of balancing the equation. You have 2 oxygen on the left, you need 2 on the right. And so you have 4 hydrogen on the left, you also need 4 on the left. So this is the overall chemical equation. And there are 2 types of hydrogen fuel cell. The first type is called the phosphoric acid fuel cell. And because it has the name acid in it, you know this fuel cell runs under acidic condition. So what happens at the anode? Maybe it's helpful to draw out what the electrode and what the fuel cell looks like, and then we can discuss. My drawing is not very good, but hopefully you can see all the important features. So you have, as you can see, you have 3 holes in your fuel cell. So remember, fuel cell is uses spontaneous redox reaction. It is not electrolytic cell. It is used to produce energy. So when you are, so it's essentially a galvanic cell as well. So in galvanic cell, anode undergoes oxidation And because you are rejecting electrons from anode, anode is negative. So this side is anode. And you are attracting electrons on the cathode. So cathode is positive. And we know that anode undergoes oxidation. And we also know that only fuels can undergo oxidation. You cannot oxidize oxygen. Oxygen is always the oxidizing agent, and thus oxygen only undergoes reduction. So for the anode side, we have hydrogen gas going into the fuel cell. Thus, in the cathode side, we have oxygen gas going into the fuel cell. Because we know that the oxidizing agent for a fuel cell is always oxygen. So what is this hole doing? So this hole is basically where your product would go. So your product is H2O. And H2O is basically leaving this fuel cell. So that's why for hydrogen cars, it has a tailpipe. And the tailpipe emits water only. So in some hydrogen cars, you can see that the water being released periodically from the car because of this exact chemical reaction or this exact fuel cell setup. So why do I draw this little dot here? So this is emphasize that we have porous electrode. Because we are dealing with gas here, so we really need a very large surface area. And those holes need to be lined with catalyst in order to increase the rate of reaction. If we do not have this porous electrode setup, the reaction will be really, really slow. And you will have a very low efficiency for your fuel cell. So that's why we need porous electrode on both sides. Remember, we also need a catalyst. Otherwise, the rate of reaction will be too slow. And just like any galvanic cell, we need electrolyte. The function of electrolyte is act as a salt bridge, balance the charge, complete the circuit. Complete circuit via movement of ions. So the cations goes to cathode, the positive ions goes to cathode. The anions, the negative ions, goes to anode, just like galvanic cells. So this is what a hydrogen fuel cell looks like. And it allows, it needs to operate at very high temperatures. So having introduced this fuel cell, let's look at the anode reaction. Because it is acid, we can just copy down this directly from the VCE Chemistry Electrochemical Series booklet. So hydrogen goes to 2H plus ion and 2 electrons. So this is the anode reaction. The cathode reaction is also found in the data book. So this is the anode reaction. The oxidation of hydrogen gas. The cathode reaction can also be found. So the trick is to find something. So how do you find it? Is to find something with H2O, oxygen, and H plus ion in your data book. So let's have a look whether we can find them. So we know that hydrogen gas is here. To get spontaneous redox reaction, we are looking for something above this hydrogen. And this is not an ideal candidate because we know that H2O2 is not a product of your reaction. So it's this equation. So So let's write it down. So oxygen. So this is the cathode reaction. This is the anode reaction. And when you combine them together, double this, so the electrons are balanced on both sides. You cancel out some of the common terms, and you get this reaction, which is exactly the same as the combustion reaction we have written out. And this should not be a surprise to you, because fuel cell is essentially doing the combustion reaction without combustion. So the fuel cell can also operate under alkaline condition. So why do we want to do that? For this phosphoric acid fuel cell, we require a temperature of 175 to 200 degrees Celsius in order to operate. And this is clearly a very, very high temperature and may not be ideal for transportation, for example. But the alkaline fuel cell can operate at 90 to 100 degrees Celsius, which is much more manageable. The efficiency is around 60% compared to 40 to 45% of phosphoric acid fuel cell. I suspect the reason for a lower efficiency is because the acid fuel cell operates at a high temperature. So some of the energy from this combustion is actually used to heat up the fuel cell. So you get a lower overall efficiency. So let's look at the anode and cathode reaction for the alkaline fuel cell. So the setup should look the same, except the electrolyte becomes basic rather than acidic. So we can actually find the anode and cathode reaction directly from the chemistry data book. So all we need is we look at some reaction containing hydrogen gas, oxygen gas, the hydroxide ion, and water. We are looking for hydroxide ion because we are operating on the alkaline environment. So let's have a look. Maybe we can find them somewhere. So we are looking for something with water, oxygen, and hydroxide ion. And this is a very good candidate. And then the next step is looking at something with hydrogen involved, but also have hydroxide ion. So this could be a good example. And these two are exactly what is going on. So this is undergoing oxidation, this is undergoing reduction. But I personally do not like this method. I think it is too random. I don't like finding random stuff on the electrochemical series. Maybe there's a better way to do it. And yes, there is. So I have mentioned in, I think, the introduction for redox reaction, how do you write anode half equations on the alkaline environment? You basically do everything as usual, as if you are on the acidic environment. But in the last step, you add the OH minus ion to cancel out the H plus ion, because the hydroxide ion and the H plus ion form water when they meet together. So we know from the previous question that the anode reaction is H2 goes to 2H plus 2 electrons. And then we just add the hydroxide ion to both sides. We need 2 because we want to balance the 2 hydrogen. And they combine to form water. So this is the anode reaction. 2OH minus plus H2, 2H2O and 2 electrons. And this is exactly the same as what we would expect if we look at the data book. And personally, I think this is a much better way rather than to guess which reaction is the correct one. The cathode one, we know that for the previous question, looks like this. Again, we balance the water by adding the OH ion. To balance the hydrogen. And these 2 cancel out and 4 becomes a 2. The charge is also balanced. And as you can see, this is exactly the same as this reaction. So you can either try to find random equations, or you can use the rule I have told you before to work out what is the anode and cathode reactions. And I recommend you to learn this technique, because that's the technique you need to excel the chemistry exam. They will always present you with an unknown scenario. But if you know how to do things under acidic and alkaline condition, then it's impossible for you to get low marks in the exam, because everything they expected you to know, you know. But if you are just memorizing the equations, then when they change the question into a different form, you will be unable to answer those questions. So now let's talk about sources of hydrogen. Because I don't know whether you have noticed or not, the hydrogen combustion is very, very good because it doesn't produce carbon dioxide. And that's why some car manufacturers are really innovating with hydrogen fuel cell cars, because they believe it is the future. And we know that there are problems with battery vehicles. They are too heavy and the range is not very good, and also the capacity will decrease over time. But for fuel cell, it acts just like an internal combustion engine. If you give them continuous supply of fuel, it can run forever. And there's no decrease in range, because unless you are reducing the size of your fuel tank. So the production of hydrogen have 2 ways. The first one is steam reforming. So this uses methane. From fossil fuels. So this steam reforming technique is actually not a very sustainable option. So let's look at the process. So methane react with steam. So that's why it's called steam reforming. So it requires water. And using a nickel catalyst, you can produce carbon monoxide gas and 3 hydrogen gas. And then we can further use the carbon monoxide to do additional steam reforming using a copper catalyst to produce carbon dioxide and hydrogen gas. So you can produce hydrogen gas from this way. But the problem is you are producing carbon dioxide. And then when you combust hydrogen, you know you get water. So if you obtain hydrogen from steam reforming process, what you are essentially doing when you look from a bigger perspective, you are essentially combusting methane, since you are converting methane to hydrogen gas and then hydrogen gas to H2O. And also, the final product, hydrogen, contains less energy than methane gas because some energy is lost during this transformation or during this chemical reaction. And it also releases carbon dioxide. So why don't you just directly combust the natural gas? So this is really not a very good idea and can be argued to be even more damaging to the environment because you are losing energy in this process. And you are also producing greenhouse gas. Even though from the fuel cell you just produce water, but in this production process you are producing carbon dioxide. So the second option is more viable. Also I should mention, if this is from biogas, then perhaps you can argue that it have a less environmental pressure. But again, why don't you just combust the biogas directly? So the second one is a more viable option. You can source from water. So this is the chemical formula of this chemical reaction. You are breaking down water into hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. And during this process you are doing electrolysis. Right? And this requires energy. So you really want this electricity to come from renewable sources. If the electricity comes from coal, you are still indirectly emitting pollution. So if you are using renewable source of electricity, then you can really solve this issue. And the hydrogen gas is green, so you have green hydrogen. And then you have a very low net impact on the environment. So now let's look at storage of hydrogen. So the storage of hydrogen can be a big problem, particularly for mobile applications like cars. So hydrogen gas, we know, has a weak dispersion force. It liquefies at negative 273 degrees. So usually hydrogen is stored as a gas. And we know that gas is very dispersed. So you can't really get too much of energy from combusting hydrogen gas directly. You need to somehow store it as a liquid. So when you want to store hydrogen gas as a liquid, you need huge pressure. To liquefy hydrogen gas. And you also need very good insulation. to keep the temperature at very, very low, like negative 270 something degrees. So because of this, you need a very bulky tank, since something that can withstand high pressure needs to be really strong and heavy as well. And this is really not good for things like cars. And also, such high pressure could be dangerous. If a hydrogen tank explodes, it can generate huge amount of energy. So it is the hydrogen bomb or hydrogen tank is used during war to cause mass destruction. So another method is to adsorb. So it's not absorb. So it is basically stick onto the surface of materials, usually like metal hydrides. And this overcomes the problem of storing hydrogen gas under huge pressure. But it is, because it's a metal hydride, it's still very heavy. So it does not solve the underlying problem. We want it to be light and easily transported in order to use it in things like cars. And because it is dangerous to store hydrogen, it's really difficult to use this hydrogen fuel cell in large applications. Not to mention the safety problem of hydrogen gas. So hydrogen gas has a low ignition point. And you only need a spark to ignite hydrogen and oxygen in literally any ratio. So even a small amount of hydrogen can be ignited. And hydrogen gas burns with invisible flame. And this could be an issue for firefighters, since you can't really see where the hydrogen is burning. And hydrogen gas is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. So it's very difficult to detect leak. It also has a very low density, so it spreads very quickly. So really, hydrogen gas is potentially very dangerous. So a lot of effort is required. So now let's go to do an actual exam question. This is taken from the 2019 chemistry exam. And this question is very poorly done. So that's why I want to do this with you. And I think it shows you how those type of questions relating to fuel cell and galvanic cell is assessed in the chemistry exam. So immediately they give you a very fancy battery, the zinc serum battery, which you are not expected to know before you come into the exam. And it's always important to read the question carefully. So let's read the question together. During recharge, the cell uses energy from wind farms or solar cell panels. So it could be talking about some renewable energy. And maybe you can mention it as one of the advantages of fuel cell. During discharge, energy is supplied to the electric grids. Okay, so this is good. So we have this, essentially we have this battery that can supply power to homes when the sun is not shining and wind is not blowing. The electrolytes are stored in separate storage tanks and are pumped into each cell when in use. So the membrane separates two electrodes, and this is really important. So we know we are doing everything under acidic condition. So what is the acid? I don't really care. I only need to know it is an acid. So you're also given a diagram. Rather complicated looking diagram. So now let's do question 1 together. So you have given two half cell equations, and you want to write the equation for the overall discharge reaction. So for discharge reaction, remember it is the spontaneous redox reaction. So if you go to your electrochemical series, it is ordered from positive to negative. And if you remember get something like this, you get negative gradient. So that's the way the reaction would occur. Here, it is ordered from negative to positive. So it is reversed. So you would need something like this. A positive gradient is actually what should happen when you have spontaneous redox reaction. So the order is reversed. If you have time, you can actually written out the two half equations in the correct orientation or correct order. But I will not do this here. You can do this exercise yourself. So essentially we have these two reacting. So zinc is being converted in this direction. It's being oxidized. And this CE complicated stuff is being reduced. So the overall discharge equation, when we look at the electrons, we should double the bottom part by 2 to make the electron balance. So we have 2 electrons on the left, 2 electrons on the right. So they cancel out each other. So really this becomes 2, this becomes 2, 2, 2. Okay, let's write down the response. So this is the equation for the overall discharge reaction. So make sure you have all the state labeled. So it's really a lot of writing for this 1 mark question. But if you are careful enough, you should be able to get this mark easily. So now let's identify the oxidizing agent. So the first thing I recommend you writing is what is oxidizing agent means it is reduced. So now let's look at what is being reduced. So we know that it is the, when we look at the overall equation, you can remove everything that has been cancelled out. It looks like this. So clearly zinc is being oxidized. So because we have only one thing left, this must be reduced. So so the reactant is CeCH3SO3 and it is turning into CeCH3SO3. So clearly the oxidation number is changing. So we know that the charge of this this acid should be -1. Since this whole molecule is neutral, if we take away one hydrogen, it should have a charge of -1. So that's how I know that the charge is -1. So because the charge for this one is -1 times 4, to make this whole species balanced, the oxidation number for cesium must be +4. And here the oxidation number must be +3, since this is -1 times 3. So the oxidation number have been decreased from 4 to 3, which means it has been reduced. And thus the oxidizing agent is just this. So that's how you get 2 marks. First mark associated with oxidation number. The second mark is to write down what is the oxidizing agent. Question C should be very easy. Theoretical voltage is just the difference between these two numbers. So it's just 1.64 plus 0.74. 6 is 2.4 volts. So this question should be easy to do. Write the ionic equation for the reaction occurring at the positive electron. So for the ionic equation, we remove the spectator ions. So clearly from this overall equation, or from the oxidizing agent question, we know that this acid thing is not participating in this reaction. It just watch the reaction, because it is not appearing separately in the reactant, or not appearing separately in the product. Or if we already know that CE is being reduced, it must be one of the reactant. So there are different ways to look at this problem. And also, perhaps this is not the hard part of the question. The hard part is to read the question. It is asking during recharging. So we know during discharging it's going from +4 to +3, and it is gaining electrons. So when it is recharging, it should be oxidized. It should lose electron to go from +3 to +4. The oxidation number. So it should look something like this. So before, during discharge, it's being reduced, or it's the oxidizing agent. During recharge, it should be the reducing agent, or it should be oxidized. So this is a very tricky question. Question E. Other than transporting ions between the electrodes, describe one function of the membrane in the zinc cerium cell. So remember that when we are doing recharge, we do not want the product to come into contact with each other. So one function of the membrane, I have also discussed this in the previous video of the application of electrolytic cell. So the first example of the production of chlorine gas, hydrogen gas, and sodium hydroxide. One of the functions of membrane is to prevent the reducing agent and oxidizing agent from contacting each other and react spontaneously. So the reducing agent in this case is the zinc, an oxidizing agent, is this complicated chemical. So if they come into contact with each other, you would get an immediately transfer of electrons. So you do not get any electric current, you just get heat. So essentially it's doing the same thing as the combustion reaction. We want to separate them into two parts so we can exploit this redox reaction, which involves transfer of electrons to produce electric current. Once they come into contact, we do not get any electric current, we just get heat. Next question, specify one factor that would limit the life of the zinc cerium cell. So I think I already discussed this in one of the videos. So one factor is side reactions. And this would consume the active ingredient, not the active chemicals in your cell. So the next question, experts have regarded this as a hybrid of fuel cell and secondary cell. And why would this be the case? So this is a tricky question. But if you just following this, the definition, you should be fine. So what is the characteristic of fuel cell? So if fuel cell has the characteristic continuously supply continuous supply of reactants. So this is the basic characteristic of fuel cell. And for secondary cell, everyone should know this, is you can recharge it. So let's look at this diagram once more. We have electrolyte tank. So it has a fuel cell characteristic because it has electrolyte tank. So the products and reactants are being continuously supplied. And from reading the question, we know that it can use energy to recharge. So the secondary cell part can use energy to recharge. So this is why it's called a hybrid of fuel cell and secondary cell. So this is the kind of question you would encounter in the exam. It's really just to apply your chemistry knowledge. You need to know how to apply electrochemical series in reverse order. You need to know oxidation number to justify what is the oxidizing agent. You need to know the theoretical voltage required. You need to learn how to read the question carefully. So it is during recharge, not discharge. You also need to know the function of membrane, and specifically the importance of separating the reactants to prevent them from spontaneously react. You also need to know what would impact the life of batteries. And you also need to know the characteristic of fuel cell and secondary cell and so on. So everything I have mentioned in the video, like battery life, side reactions, also the characteristic of fuel cells, I do not mention those because I want to mention those. So everything I said in this video will be assessed in the chemistry exam.